Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak to you today about warm spaces, something which I'm hugely passionate about. So we started to think about warm spaces in Gateshead as early as June. And the reason why that was is because we were already getting intelligence from our local citizens' advice in this early summer about the problems that were piling up in the system around energy affordability and disconnections. So the basic offer of any warm space in Gateshead is that the agencies that sign up to be a warm space sign up to a charter. And our charter was created in collaboration with our local Poverty Truth Commission. Now, the Poverty Truth Commission is includes civic commissioners with lived experience of poverty. So by getting them involved in the creation of a charter which sets out the values and beliefs of what a warm space should be, we hopefully have created something which will be welcoming to the people that we're hoping to target. So they told us about the things that would encourage them to use a space, about the things that would discourage them from using the space, the values, beliefs and behaviours that they would expect from the people that were running the warm spaces. And we've created a very simple charter that talks about dignity, respect, a warm welcome. You'll never be asked why you're using a warm space. People won't be gossiping about you, all of those sorts of things. And that's a great piece of work that's come out of working with those people with lived experience. Of course, the next important thing for a warm space is that your space is actually warm. And some of the agencies that have stepped forward to be warm spaces have found this particularly tricky because there's not a huge amount of some of the community buildings are really struggling. I'm seeing things in the chat to say that people are struggling to hear me. Is that the case? Okay, so ensuring that the space is actually warm, and the ideal temperature is about 18 to 21 degrees. Believe it or not, 24 degrees is too warm for a warm space. People with heart conditions can find that really troubling. So getting the temperature right in a warm space is really important. And the minimum offer is, of course, that they offer a hot drink as well, and that they agree to be included in our online directory of warm spaces. The other thing that we did was, because we recognise that not some of these venues will be welcoming clients for the first time. So we have within our network of warm spaces a number of agencies like bowling greens and cricket clubs and rugby clubs and village halls, etc., which have not necessarily welcomed this sort of client group into their space before. So ensuring that the agencies are equipped was something that we felt was really important. So we created some mandatory training for the organisations to participate in. And as part of this, within the training, there is sections on how to make every contact count, how to make sure that they understand how to have a difficult conversation, how to de-escalate conflict, but also that they understand what it's like for people out there at the moment. So what does the cost of living rise mean for people, and how do they understand and get people to the right places? So there's a little bit about making referrals and signposting. There's also a second, which is discretionary, which is around energy efficiency and energy advice and how to get people to the right place. So there's two training modules. The first is mandatory, the second is discretionary. So it was really important to us that the process for warm spaces was as easy and as free from bureaucracy as possible. We've offered a grant to our warm spaces of just £500. That's not a lot of money. It's certainly not a sum of money that's going to make people go, oh, I must be a warm space because I'm going to make lots of money from this. The small grant really is about ensuring that everybody gets to the start line at the same time, that they're all flushed out of the long grass, that we are able to create the directory at the same time. And it's really about a collaboration of the willing. So we've taken the low-hanging fruit in the first round of our funding. These are agencies that in the main would have been open anyway, heating their buildings anyway, and want to come together to do something really great for their communities. They're not motivated by the small grants. They're motivated by understanding that their communities are in crisis. They've told us that they're spending the small grant on a variety of things. Some are spending it on soft furnishings, some have bought a tea urn, some are using it towards their utility bills, some are using it for craft activities, etc. So a full range of things. But again, and this is important, we're not necessarily monitoring their spend, because we know that to actually run a warm space is going to cost them much more than the £500 that we are giving them. The £500 is in return for them completing monitoring information so that we know the sorts of numbers of people who are coming through. It was also really important to us that the grant agreement that they signed was not burdensome. My first attempt with our legal team around what that grant should look like was a 40-page grant agreement. Now, when you're giving a voluntary sector organisation £500 to deliver something that you already know is going to cost them more than £500 to deliver, giving them a 40-page grant agreement is not really the way that we wanted to go. So in the end, after much negotiation, we got that down to 2 sides of A4, a letter of grant agreement, basically setting out very basic reciprocal conditions and how we wanted to work together. That was much easier. The monitoring, however, has been a little bit more complicated because we have funded our warm spaces from the Household Support Fund. And those of you who will have been involved in that will know that they require a lot of monitoring information. So that's not ideal. And one of the lessons that we have learned from the funding of this warm space is that if you have an alternative to the Household Support Fund, I would certainly encourage you to take that alternative so that you can be lighter touch with the monitoring actually and really just collect numbers. We are forced to collect the name and address, postcode, and the makeup of the household because of the way that we have been able to fund this. The sorts of organisations that we have are varied. We have 75 organisations in total so far. It's been very easy for us to get those 75 organisations. We're getting inquiries every single day. They are cricket clubs, they're bowling greens, they're rugby clubs, they're veterans organisations, they're advice organisations, they're cancer charities, mental health charities, organisations that are working with refugees and asylum seekers. So the full gambit of community support across our borough. And the sorts of things that they are doing in their spaces are also very varied. So we have organisations that are providing activities. Some are doing bingo and sing-alongs, some are doing craft activities. One of our organisations, a community project, is doing family film nights where they're not necessarily promoting the warm space idea, but they are creating activities within which people can come. So everybody sits under our warm spaces branding. Everybody has a copy of the charter on display in their organisations, and everyone is expected to live and breathe those values, but how they actually deliver a warm space is entirely up to them. They're autonomous organisations. Yes, the council is facilitating the coming together of this network, and it has brought some additional resource into the network, but in the main, it's a reorganisation and a rebranding of a coalition of willing people under a common brand. So you're not necessarily bringing in new capacity to your network. You're using your network, your buildings, your assets, your volunteers, your community partners in a really different way. And within that, we've leaned quite heavily on our local council of voluntary service, which in Gateshead is called Connected Voice. You will have something similar, I'm sure, in your own areas. And they've helped us to make sure that the Warm Spaces initiative is promoted at the real grassroots organisations, the ones that are in communities, that know the people that live in those communities, that understand the context in which those people are living. And that's been really important to us. The council obviously has connections with VCS organisations, but often those very small community grassroots organisations are not necessarily always the organisations that we are working with. So by working with our local council of voluntary service, we've been able to really get to those smaller organisations. And that's important, as I say, because that encourages, we believe, people to come in. That's not to say that we're not using council buildings. We are in some cases. We have some of our libraries, some of our volunteer libraries, some of our statutory libraries. But in the main, our warm spaces are rooted in community wherever possible. Now, that's not the case across the country, as other people are developing the idea of warm spaces or warm hubs or warm welcomes or whatever they're choosing to call them. Some are using their council housing stock and they are creating an idea which is much more around an advice and support hub. Again, in Gateshead, we've chosen not to do that. We've chosen to make this more of a discretionary experience for our residents. somewhere where they can come in and just exist if that's what they want to do. So although we have lots of warm spaces that are offering activities, we also have lots of warm spaces that are just providing a living room type area actually. And in Citizens Advice is a really good example of this. In our reception area, we have created a living room with comfy sofas, with soft furnishings, with foliage, with tablets that people can sit and surf the internet, with the daily newspaper and really up-to-date magazines. Not old ones that have been sitting there for months that are all dog-eared, but this week's magazines, where people can really just come and exist as if they would in their own living room, but not at their expense. So we're providing tea and coffee and some light snacks for them to eat. Now, at no point will Citizens Advice staff approach those people to see if they want advice, information and guidance. The service is available to people if they want it, but this is not for us about service delivery, and that is different in other areas. But I want people to be able to go in these spaces with the absolute freedom of knowing that they're never going to bump into anybody that's going to have to make them have to have a conversation about rent or council tax arrears or any of their problems if that's not what they want to do, that they go into a space knowing that they will be warmly welcomed, that they will be valued, that they will have warm conversation if that's what they want, their mind taken off their problems. Obviously, in the course of those conversations, you can't dispute that these things will come up, but all of our agencies have been trained to understand how to respond to that, how to make every contact count, and how to get that person to the right agency if that is what the person wants. And I think that that for us is really, really important. When we spoke to our civic commissioners in the Poverty Truth Commission, that was really important to them. They wanted the safety of knowing that they wouldn't be ambushed when they went into a warm space, that they wouldn't be forced to take services that they may or may not want, that building the relationships locally ultimately would hopefully get them to those services eventually, but that wouldn't be the primary thing and that they wouldn't be pounced upon when they got there. So as part of this, we're making a difference locally. 75 agencies across our borough are now warm spaces, with promoting a recognisable brand of warm spaces across our borough. They have that outward branding on all of their buildings and a shared vision of what it means to be a warm space, minimum standard of obviously being warm, a warm welcome and a hot drink. Many are providing other things. So in one of the Methodist churches that's opened as a warm space, they've chosen to have their warm space on a day when they also have a fair share market and they also have a Citizens Advice outreach. If people want to access that, they can. So that session has a very vibrant feel. If you go into the Methodist church, you're very inconspicuous. You're not going to be standing out as somebody who has come in there to be warm. There's lots of stuff going on. But as part of this, all of our agencies have received training on understanding the cost of living crisis, making every contact count, de-escalating conflict. And that's really important for warm spaces, but also helpful in their other work. And literally scores and scores of frontline workers have received workforce development around energy advice, where to find it, how to signpost and refer to the right help at the right time. And that's training that we will be providing on an ongoing basis. They've also signed up to be included in our online directory, and we have created that to look a bit like a TripAdvisor offer. So it's very accessible. There are icons, for example, to let people know when they can get a free drink, if there's accessible toilets, if there's disabled parking, if there's a main bus route, if there are baby changing facilities, if your pets are welcome there, a whole range of stuff. So you'll see your entry with your name and address, your venue opening hours, but then you'll also see a list with icons that demonstrate to people at a glance what they can expect from each warm space and whether they're going to get activities there or whether they're just going to have a quiet space. And it's really important that people know that before they go into a space, because personally, the last thing that I would want if I walked into a warm space would be to have to participate in a sing-along, but I'd be quite happy to go into the library and just sit and browse and be quite inconspicuous in that space. But everybody wants something different. What we don't know yet, of course, is what the impact's going to be for our residents around social isolation, around improving their health and well-being, around increasing their connectivity, developing their networks and their personal resilience, because we're literally just out of the blocks on this, but we will be evaluating all of that. And my experience of working with colleagues in public health is that we anticipate that we will have positive impacts across all of those things. So I'm really excited to see how that's going to develop. The other impact that we've had is that our Poverty Truth Commission has been emboldened by the success of warm spaces, and they've been going around the country talking to other Poverty Truth Commissions about warm spaces and encouraging them to get involved in the initiatives. But it's also resulting in them now talking to us about delivering a second commission in Gateshead, which is a fantastic result for us. We're also speaking to local businesses who are very interested in how they can get involved in this. Now, in some of our local neighbours in Northumberland, for example, I know that warm spaces have been developed in commercial outlets where businesses have been coming forward and offering a bowl of soup and a free hot drink for people who are coming into their premises. Again, in Gateshead, we've chosen not to do that, but I know that it's working successfully in other areas. So it's for each area to work out what works for them. Where we think businesses can add value to our model is around sponsoring some of our warm spaces with their utility costs, sponsoring with some of the merchandising that we would like to have in warm spaces, and also by sponsoring the creation of winter warming boxes or gift bags, which we've already got one sponsor for and are developing that offer right now. My ultimate vision for warm spaces is that we have almost like a winter warming table that people can choose the items that are valuable to them. That might be a thermos flask, it might be a fleecy jumper, it might be warm bedding, but that's ultimately where we're heading. And as I say, for Gateshead residents, we're still trying to understand what it means for them in terms of health and well-being, but in terms of numbers, we've just done a very quick count up of some of the people that are coming into venues. And while some of our venues, it's true to say, have had no visitors, we do have several venues who have had 60 to 70 people turn up to a single session. Now, that has far exceeded my expectations in terms of what a warm space would be accommodating. What I don't understand yet is whether that is in response to a particular popular activity that venue is hosting, or whether that is literally just an area of high deprivation where there's high demand. So we need to understand that. But already those numbers are very significant, considering in the northeast of England where we are, the weather has been unfashionably mild of late. So it's an indication of what's to come. And on that subject of what's next, developing our network, we will continue to invite new entrants into our warm space network and to develop our existing network and how we support that. We've created a closed Facebook page so that our network can talk to each other. We're also regularly sending very short surveys out to our networks to let them know the sorts of questions that residents are asking us and to get feedback from them on what's working well. So, for example, when we first started, we never imagined that people would want to take their pets to the venue, but now understanding what warm spaces will allow pets in and what won't is something that we need to add to our directory. The other thing that people are asking us about are what facilities for washing clothes. So again, we're going to be exploring whether some of our warm spaces could provide facilities for people to wash and dry clothes, which is something that we hadn't necessarily anticipated when we started on this journey. So understanding what residents want, understanding the experience for the venues, understanding the power of this network and what it could become is where we are now. We also know that we have gaps in our network. I mentioned earlier that in our first tranche, we'd taken very much the low-hanging fruit, the agencies which have naturally gravitated towards this with little persuasion. But having mapped where they are, we have some gaps, both geographically, but also in terms of opening hours. Much of our offer is through the day, Monday to Friday. We have some out-of-hours stuff through our libraries and leisure centres, and we're talking to our local fire and rescue service about how we can use their community rooms over the weekend. But that out-of-hours stuff is something that we're going to be exploring. We also need to understand how we can support those for whom public transport is difficult, or those that can't get out of the house. So again, we're exploring community transport options. It feels unlikely that we will be able to provide that for all of our venues. more likely that we will identify 6 strategic venues across the borough for which community transport will be available, and it's possible that that won't be every day, but something is better than nothing, but the cost of that is quite prohibitive for us. Warm spaces are not the panacea to this problem. It's one of a number of things that we're doing in Gateshead. So whilst this is very high profile and we're very proud of it, we know that it's not the answer. And then the other thing is communities of interest. So we want some of our warm spaces to be open to anyone in the general public that wants to drop in. Of course we do, but then there are some communities of interest for whom a drop-in model would not be appropriate. You wouldn't want people dropping in. So again, looking at communities of interest and making sure that we have those fully covered is the next stage. So the next part of our warm spaces network will be a much more strategic manoeuvre than the first part. The other thing that we're thinking about doing is crowdfunding or something similar. We had some success over the Christmas around crowdfunding for Brighten the Day of a Child, where we were looking to provide a nice Christmas experience for children who had been involved in COVID, and we're exploring the opportunities and challenges around creating a similar campaign to support vulnerable individuals and families through the winter months. And then finally, the evaluation to understand the health impacts on our residents is something which is really, really important to us. Now, we have a huge amount of information on our website already, so those of you that might want to look at the charter or to see the expression of interest that we created for warm spaces, which was very, very light touch. There was not a huge application process. It was just a Microsoft form that we used where we asked agencies to tell us a little bit about themselves, what they do and how they imagined a warm space would work for them, and the numbers of people that they thought they might get through their warm space. We're not holding anyone to account on that. We've given them £500 at the end of the day. We're liaising with everyone and we're talking to them and we're encouraging everybody and we're promoting the network. But this is a light touch, a community response almost, the enabling of community activism. It's not a sort of hardcore council commissioning experience that we have created in Gateshead. So I'll stop there, I think, because I think that we wanted to give over the majority of the time to questions. I can see that there's been lots coming in the chat, but unfortunately it's impossible for me to monitor those and to speak to you. I'm sorry for the noise at the start of the presentation. I hope that it quietened a little as it went on.